Hello, my name is Danielle Musoji. I am the director of Arise, as well as I'm a senior social worker with the Masters in Social Policy and Management. As Arise, we believe that all children deserve to be in thriving families, and we work in three ways. The first way that we work is through family preservation. We look at the importance of strengthening family units, no matter how those families are formed. What does it take to have secure attachment, but particularly looking at the complex needs of children and families at risk in our communities that are exposed to continuous trauma, the impact that it has on behavior, and the impact that it has on all the systems that our children find themselves, be it the community environment, school environment, church environment. We are there to support those families and their children through our psychosocial support programs, as well as through family risk assessments and partnerships with grassroots organizations. The second way that we work is how do we support families who have grown through adoption and foster care, knowing that is a starting place for trauma for many of our children that finds ourselves in blended families. And so we need to understand attachment. We need to understand grief and loss. We need to understand identity and the complexities that brings in child development. And so we do that through our national conferences, our online workshops, and our parenting support programs specifically for adoptive families. And then the third way is through training and consulting. This is both nationally as well as internationally, looking at child trauma and specifically what does it take for us as mental health professionals to understand the systems that our children find themselves, the family unit, education, communities, and what tools and skills do we need to have as adults working with children who have complex needs. And so to find out more about Arise, I please encourage you to go to our website at www.arisefamily.org, and you'll see a lot more information today. So today, I'm really going to be spending some time around looking at the importance of intergenerational trauma and how this impacts and affects our children as well as our families, and that actually it has long-term impact. So it really is about the intersection of our work as mental health professionals and child protection advocates. How do we see what is in the best interest of children? And we cannot work with children in isolation. We need to be working with the systems that our children find themselves in. And this is their family. And if we want to work with families and strengthen families, we know this is important for children's well-being. So intergenerational trauma really refers to the transmission of trauma from one generation to the next. It's not just the genetic or behavioral patterns we inherit. It's the emotional, relational, and the psychological wounds that are passed down silently, often without awareness. People aren't aware that they are carrying that trauma with them into the relationships that they find themselves in. And in our context in South Africa, especially working in communities affected by systemic inequality, violence, displacement, and poverty, we see that unresolved trauma often becomes part of our family's emotional DNA. And parents who have not had the opportunity to process their own histories of neglect, abuse, or loss may struggle to provide that emotional safety that their children need. And this is vital, particularly when it comes to trauma. It's that felt safety that children need in order to thrive. So here's the key issue, right? When we're talking about intergenerational trauma, is that unhealed trauma can show up in our parenting. And so we always ask ourselves, we need that parenting group, we need parenting skills. But the reality is we can't give our parents parenting skills without understanding the trauma that they are carrying. Because we know that when we are parenting, we are being triggered by our own stories, our own experiences. And if that is not healed, this is when we pass that to the next generation. And so in the way that caregivers respond to stress, in their ability to attune to their children's need, and in their capacity to regulate their own emotions, which we know without that support, trauma is more likely to repeat itself through patterns, particularly of harsh discipline. And we see that through the work that we do, that parents do hit. So they're using corporal punishment, they're using verbal abuse and emotional abuse in order to gain control of the situation, but also how society views children, right? And I always, when we work with parents, we always go, what is your expectation of children? We treasure children, particularly when they're born, but as they start developing, and I always say, children's jobs are to misbehave. Children aren't made to sit still and to listen. They are meant to be curious of that world. They are meant to make mistakes and to learn from that. And in secure and felt safety relationships, they are able to explore fully who they are, what they can trust, what they can't trust. And so when parents are not healed, have not acknowledged the trauma, and these patterns of harsh discipline happens because actually I was hit and I was shouted at, and that made me listen. Therefore, if I do this with my own child, that will be able to happen as well. And so we have patterns of harsh discipline. We also have emotional unavailability. And that is because many of the times our parents cannot understand or regulate their own emotions. And we know with high substance abuse as well that our parents can also then be emotionally unavailable. And this often turns out to be neglect for many of our children, which affects them on many ways, particularly the rewiring of their brain as well. And so that is really important to understand. So as we're looking at parents, and particularly when we look at that emotional safety, when our parents are not attuned to our children's needs emotionally, this also affects that sense of belonging that children feel within their home. And so we have, again, repeat of harsh discipline, emotional unavailability, and this often leads to abuse. And in the many families that we work with in marginalized communities, this abuse is not in terms of I'm meaning to abuse my children, but really through learned behavior. And so often not out of malice that I want to harm my child, but actually it's out of that survival-based reaction. Our parents are not responding to our children. They are reacting to their children through learned behavior and that trauma that they're carrying on. And this is really where child protection and trauma-informed practice must work together. If we only address surface level symptoms, right, like a child's behavior or a caregiver's disciplinary choices, we miss the chance of getting to the root issues of what's causing the reactions within the home. And that is why when we look at long-term impact with our parents going through different courses or children going through different programs, it actually is not sustainable. And we see that same child who's gone through certain programs that only look at the behavior and not working with parent and child on the traumas that they are facing, the children are more likely to repeat that intergenerational traumas behavior with their own children as well. And so to truly protect children, we must support the healing of parents and caregivers. And so how do we do this then? Well, we look at a few ways of doing this. One is we need to acknowledge the historical and systemic trauma, including the legacies of apartheid, colonialism, and community violence. And we have seen this in our parenting programs. We have seen this through our parents and our grandparents who are raising our children, this next generation, sharing the pain of being removed from their roots, from their home. You know, I recently did a home visit with one of our facilitators, and we were visiting an 80-year-old grandfather, a single grandfather looking after 6 children. Now he's 80, looking after 6 children, the youngest being 5. And so one of the things that he said that has stuck with me for over a year, he said, you know, our families are not what they were back in the day because, you know, his family in particular, who's now in Haderfeld, most of his family is now either in Mossel Bay or in Paarl, and they're not in the communities where they grew up. So finding that support for himself is particularly difficult. And we know through the global research that Arise has done is that when we want children to reach their full potential and step out of that poverty trap that they find themselves in, they really only need 3 things. One is access to good enough education, and that's a whole other talk about what is good enough education. And then secondly, they need one permanent caregiver. It doesn't need to be the biological parent, but a caregiver who's going to give them that stability, that permanency, that nurturing environment, that unconditional love, that sense of belonging, and that motivation of resilience that, hey, we can do hard things. We can persevere. We can problem solve. And then thirdly, those caregivers need support. And that is what's missing in our links is actually what are the tools that parents need? And then secondly, you know, what support are we giving to our parents to acknowledge that pain that they have gone through? And how can they then move on and create new communities of a sense of belonging and that we are a unit? Another way of really supporting caregivers is through supporting parents' mental health. So not just focusing on the parenting skills and positive discipline, which becomes almost kind of a niche way of everyone talking about, but really about one's mental health, about self-awareness, to go, actually, I'm not coping right now. How do I remove myself from the situation rather than harming our children? And that really is what Arise focuses on when we look at parenting support groups. We really spend more time looking at how do we build that self-awareness. Who are you? You know, parenting is part of my identity. It's not the fullness of my identity. And so who am I before I become that parent? What is my experiences that I'm still holding on to that I'm easily triggered and I go into my fight, flight, freeze, and fawn space where my children are then either being neglected or abused or they're not feeling safe within the relationship that that parent has. And so it is vital if we want to protect children that we give that space to parents as well. We also want to create safe relational spaces for our caregivers to reflect on their own stories without that shame, right? That shame that comes with, I've made really bad mistakes. I have done substance abuse while I'm pregnant, and yet I want to make a difference. And so it's helping parents have that safe space without going, yes, you know, you're a terrible parent, but actually parenting is the hardest thing that we'll ever have to do. And so, you know, that is something I usually share with our parents that we work with in order to remove that shame, to go, even as mental health professionals, we might have all the tools, all the knowledge of how to be a good parent, but it's extremely hard when you're in that moment and your child is pushing all your buttons and you're trying to do gentle, connected parenting. And it's extremely hard because it takes a lot of self-awareness. It's understanding the stress that you're under. And sometimes you can't meet all your children's needs at that time when your cup is empty. And so this is why it's important that we build protective factors like connection, like strengthening community support and coping skills that can disrupt that trauma cycle. So what are the resources available for our parents to go to that they can just talk about their struggles and the support that they need? So as professionals, our role is not only to treat the child, but to look at the family system and to advocate for services that are both restorative and preventative. And with the right support, cycles can be broken and healing can begin. So let's continue to hold both the child and the caregiver in mind when it comes to developing interventions for our children at risk, knowing that every moment of safety, felt safety, empathy, our superpower, and connection, we can create the plant and plant the seed of change for the next generation. And so I hope that is an encouragement to all of you who are looking at ways of how do we protect our children. Well, we can't just do work with our children. We have to look at the whole system as well. And part of it is how do we support our parents, not only giving them parenting skills, but also a safe space where they can talk about their trauma, talk about the cycle of abuse that they have gone through and the neglect that they've gone through. Because a lot of the time, what we are actually doing is while we're asking parents to be the best parents for their children, we also need to reparent the parent as well as mental health professionals. And so how do we do that? So how do we do this? Through compassionate understanding and non-judgment. Many parents are doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. So we need to approach them with empathy, not blame, recognizing the impact of their own trauma and history. 2, we need safe, non-stigmatizing spaces. Parents need to feel safe to share their struggles without the fear of being judged or reported, obviously unless their children are at risk. So trust is the foundation of change. 3, we need reflective spaces to explore their own stories. We need support groups, trauma-informed therapy, or even structured conversations to help parents make sense of their past so it doesn't unconsciously shape their parenting. And we need a lot more tools from mental health professionals in this way. 4, we need emotional regulation support. Parents need tools for managing their stress, their anger, and fear, specifically when they were never taught how, such as mindfulness, breathing techniques, emotional coaching can also be so powerful for our parents in need. 5, we can educate on attachment and child development. Many caregivers haven't been exposed to how children's brains develop or how trauma affects that behavior. So psychoeducational helps reframe what they see in their children, particularly when we go, actually, behavior is a language that children speak. Children are not made to be deviant. They're not trying to make your day bad. It's really about actually understanding that behavior is an express need that children are expressing to you. And so when we reframe our thoughts and understand that, then we can go, actually, they're not trying to be mean to me. They're not trying to make me angry. They're just saying, hey, actually, I'm hungry. I need a hug. I'm not coping. And so as parents, how do we meet that need? And then number 6, connection to practical resources. So our parents who are finding themselves in poverty and marginalized communities, housing instability and food insecurity adds to the toxic stress on the family unit that then impacts children. So linking families to social support and basic service is part of that trauma-informed care that our families and children need as well. And that is why we need to be able to work in partnership as well as in collaboration with a variety of organizations. One organization is not going to be able to do everything. Another way of reparenting the parent is consistency. Too many of the times we have professionals coming in and out of spaces and different. We know our statutory services have the highest turnover rate because our social workers are overworked and underpaid. And so we need consistent professionals so that our parents can also build trust and understand, actually, this is not another social worker or another professional who's going to come in and out of our life. Us as professionals also need to role model the importance of being consistent with our families as well. Also, we know once-off interventions don't work. Family needs sustained support over time, offered by that consistent professional who understand their context. It is deeply, one, unethical, two, hard for parents to retell their story over and over again to a new professional without any impact. And so what happens is that our parents and our families start losing hope, and they go, well, you're just another person to make promises, and then they leave as well. Number 8, which is so important, we need cultural humility and relevance to support that must honor their family culture, their family's race, their faith, and their community. And so as professionals, we really need to understand, working in South Africa, we have many different types of families. We have different types of beliefs. And so we need to understand what is important to that family. And so trauma-informed care, if we're trying to break those cycles of intergenerational trauma, needs to be context-informed as well. We need to understand our families and not put our own biases and our own understanding into what is family into those dynamics. Number 9 is empowerment, not pity. Parents need to feel that they are capable and not broken. Our role is to build on their strengths. And so that's why as Arise, we use a strength-based approach when working with families and children. And we need to help them write a new story. And I always tell our families, this story doesn't need to be your full story. We can rewrite it. We can have a new chapter. And then lastly, and most importantly for our reparenting the parent, is hope. They need to know that change is possible. And we are often the first people who need to believe in them. And our hope can be the beginning of their healing. And so that's really important that we take all of these factors as we develop interventions, as we walk a journey with parenting. There are no quick fixes. Here, there's no quick fixes in helping parents. It's a long journey because we're working with people, but ultimately it's the relationships that we have with the parents that can role model to their relationship with their children. And once we come and walk that journey side by side, that is how we protect our children in the long term. So when we go back a year, 2 years later, they have a new story, a new chapter in that family. As I end, I want to encourage you that if we are all about child protection, it is important that we look at what is the intergenerational trauma and its impact it has on families today. How do we break that cycle? How do we ensure that we're not just working with the child at hand, but we're also working with the parents and the caregivers of those children, particularly in spaces and communities that are not ideal, right? That we are talking about healing intergenerational trauma when we know our families are facing consistent and present trauma as well. And so it's complex. And this takes creativity from our professionals. It takes ideas that we can't do it one-on-one. We can't do it alone. We need to work on groups. And Arise is passionate about that. So if you want to know more, if you want to connect with us, please go to our website at www.arisefamily.org. Contact us, set up a meeting. We love to collaborate. We love to talk more. We love to come and lecture and talk about what is happening on the ground and the real change that we are seeing while we're working with families and children at risk. So thank you.